Hey everyone, Adam here, so Wizard Podcast. I have a really cool interview for you today. I got to sit down with Lee Ann Kurr, writer-director of Student Body, a new horror thriller that really pays homage to classic horror thrillers that we all love. We go through them title by title in the interview, so no point in rehashing it here. This was a really fun interview. I love doing this one. We went pretty deep on Leanne's writing process. I always love talking to writers and creators of all sorts, and to get as deep and nerdy as possible about their process. So we go on a couple of tangents there, which I absolutely loved. And then of course we talk about our newest movie, Student Body, which is available now. Really fun interview. A lot of good stuff coming in the future from Leanne, I'm sure. So check it out and enjoy. Hey everyone, Adam here, So Wizard Podcast. I'm sitting down with Lee Ann Kurr to talk about her latest movie, Student Body. How you doing, Leanne?
Doing great, Adam. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for coming on. This should be fun.
Yeah.
Before we get to Student Body, the one thing I always like to start with is asking creative people to go all the way back. And when did you know you wanted to be in the entertainment business and to direct and do everything like that?
Yeah, it's a more roundabout route, I'd say, than some people. But I started in theater, so I grew up on stage and just really fell in love with acting, and then pursued it in undergrad and pursued it pretty fastidiously. I studied abroad and did a bunch of like classical acting training programs. So with Shakespeare theaters, and really came from like that classical background, and really wanted to do regional stage and classical like Shakespeare regional theaters. That was kind of my thing. That's what I was like, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. But during undergrad, I also started pursuing playwriting and just really fell in love with writing and then also working with actors as opposed to just being the performer myself. So I really credit my liberal arts education at Drew University for that breadth that I got. I think if I had gone to just a conservatory training, I might have stayed down that one path, but actually ended up finding out that writing and directing was a better use of my energies in terms of what I was interested in. So after graduating, I was in a couple like off Broadway things in New York and was really pursuing that acting thing for a beat, and then just really came to the realization that writing and directing was what was best for me, and that also ultimately the medium of screenwriting was better suited for what I was wanting to express and achieve artistically than playwriting and like directing for the stage. So I love the theater, and I'm happy to have come from the theater. I love my classical background and acting background, and I think it all informs me as a writer director in film. And ultimately came to realize that film was the medium that I was most excited to work in and most excited to create pieces in.
That is really cool. So do you act at all anymore, or you just kind of put it aside for now?
It's the days have gone. They have gone past. But I love working with actors and feel that my training, my pretty, fastidious training as an actor has really equipped me to work in an informed and empathic way with my actors. So I'm very glad to come from that. But I think those days are done.
All right. You kind of already answered my next question then, is I imagine that coming from in front of the camera when you get behind it has to help you immensely.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, I never actually performed behind the camera. I was always only on stage.
Oh, true.
But
Okay.
so much of the principles that you learn, especially with like working with some of the classics, it's just all about how you do the actual work informing the character, and how you relate to other people and how you respond with your scene partner. So much of it translates so nicely. So yeah, it was a bit of a switch going from being on stage to being behind a camera, but a lot of it translated.
So you find there is a lot of crossover between stage and screen, whether it's acting or on the writing side?
Absolutely. I think there's no mistake that, especially on the British side, some of the actors that we know and love the most, like Idris Elba, like they all come from really incredible theater backgrounds. And also Christian Camargo, who was one of my leads in the film, played Mr. Anspach. He also comes from the theater. He did productions at the Globe. He had worked with Mark Rylance. He played Hamlet in New York. Like he had come from this really incredible Shakespeare classical background. And I think that, not that you can't be a wonderful actor and not come from that, but I think there's no coincidence that there can be a connection there, with people who have studied in that way. So I think it's a great route to go for actors in terms of honing their craft. And I certainly love doing it myself.
Just as an outsider's perspective looking in, it seems like all stage productions, whether you're acting or behind the scenes, it seems like when you're doing the shows as often as a lot of these plays go, is like it's like acting or directing or whatever boot camp. Like you're just in it and doing it. So
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. I think actors are such incredible artists. And I think oftentimes it gets kind of like, oh, all they have to do is make faces and look nice. It's like, no, it is such a rigorous activity. And I think on stage, it's temporal. You have to perform for an hour and a half straight. Whereas when you're shooting, it's like take and take and take and take. And every time you do a take, you're getting more input. You're trying, working with your scene partner. You have crazy things. Maybe you're wearing a crazy costume. You have your director being like, try this, try this, try this. Like, it's such a boot camp in either medium, just in different ways. But I
mhm.
think like there's so much respect that I have for actors where you have to constantly give and give and give, and be present in really weird circumstances sometimes, especially on film sets. So I think the rigor that you would get from theater would translate really well as an actor in film.
That makes a lot of sense. And I imagine it might even be easier in some ways. And I guess using the word easy is kind of risky, but on stage, you're taking your character's journey from beginning to end as the story plays out. But in a movie,
Hmm.
you're doing a 3-minute scene, turn it on and go. Now you're doing this other scene that's completely unrelated, not even next to it, turn it on and go. Like that's got to be the hardest thing.
I think that's a great point, Adam. I remember the first time I learned that movies were shot out of sequence, and coming from theater, I was like, "What are you talking about? That
Yeah, it
sounds
makes no sense.
terrible." Yeah, for the actors, I was like, "You can't do that. They must not do that." And it's like, "No, you have to do it."
Yeah.
Um, but that's another great thing about like the actor director relationship is like, working on student body and stuff, like having that moment where I'm like, okay, let's get centered in where the character's journey is. And when you're working with really talented performers and actors, they can like find the moment in the emotional through line of their character and be like, okay, this is the scene where I'm here. I'm not here yet, and I'm not there, but I'm right here. And that's, a really interesting thing to go into after theater where it's like, no, it's just all kind of one long moment that's chronological.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And it's also interesting when an actor has to play something and they've read the script, they know what comes next, but the character doesn't know. Like that just it kind of boggles my mind how anyone keeps it straight.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And do you find that as a director now, you wrote and directed, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I didn't know if you were being polite and not correcting me because like I thought I looked it up, but I'm like, crap, am I remembering that wrong? So sorry about that. Um,
Okay.
did you find it going into that mode and having to cut your script up and like, oh, we're shooting these today because the location, not necessarily because the sequence of the movie. You were saying it kind of blew your mind when you found that out. Doing it in practice, did you find it difficult?
Oh no, it's a really wonderful question. I think because I had been living with the material for so long, it was easy for me. And I think one of the most important things about a director that I had gotten a piece of advice from someone is that the director is the only person on set that's there specifically for the actors. Like if you think about the whole creative team that's running around, your gaffers and your electricians and you have your like your production designer, everyone's running around and facilitating the creation of like the image and the sound, like, but no one else is there specifically for the actors to be that person, that touchstone that the actors can look to for their performance and for their grounding. So I felt that like even though we're shooting out of order. The first scene that we shot, for anyone that's seen the movie or will see the movie, there's a scene early on where our hero Jane visits her math teacher after school, and it's a bit of like an uncomfortable situation. And my lead actress Monse Hernandez is really really talented, and I just wanted to throw her right in. So the first scene we shot was that scene, and that was a choice of like letting those natural nerves that she was feeling, although she's a total professional. It's not that she wasn't doing a great job, but just sort of, day one, scene one, and just kind of launching her into this kind of nerve wracking moment with this math teacher. So that helped inform it really well. And so, yeah, I'd say like it is interesting to hop around like that, but I love that because that means that like I'm that grounding point for my actors. And even though, everyone's like, oh, get that light and oh, we need to move that chair, da, 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 like they can always find me and hopefully have me as a resource to stay clocked in on what the scene is. Because I always like to say, like, all this effort and hurricane around us doesn't really, at the end, actually tell the story unless the actors are bringing the story to us. Not that the rest of the work isn't wonderful and important, but we need the performances there as well. So I really relished being that role on stage. On set.
That's a really interesting way to put it, and a really good way to put it too, because it does take a ton of people to make a movie generally, and everyone's job is very important. But yeah, the actors is what the audience sees, so they need to be taken care of. Makes a lot of sense. And I always find I respond to movies more when you know that it's a director who's all about the actors, whether they came from acting or not, but it does translate.
Yeah, and that's not in any way to say, one person is more important than another.
No, no.
Everyone's working so hard and doing beautiful work. I just really, my personal take on it, and everyone's, every director works differently, is just that I have to be that person in the midst of that craziness, the eye of the hurricane, that's there for them because everyone else is doing something else. Everyone else is busy with something else. So
Right. And I don't want this to sound like I'm casting judgment on any actors, but it probably helps even more so with a younger cast because they just haven't been doing it as long typically.
I think that's a great point. I mean, my cast here with Student Body was, I mean, everyone had been in things like Austin Sager had been in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, the, Guillermo del Toro produced movie. And, you have Harley Quinn Smith, who grew up on sets of her dad's films and other films. And then all of them had been doing work. But, it definitely was really great to work with younger performers and to find the different ways. They all had different ways of working, and I think they all had different needs from me as a director. And it's kind of a process of discovery where the first couple of days you're sussing out, like, okay, like that's the actor where they just want to do takes, they just want to go and go and go and go. They don't really want to stop and talk about it. Like, they just want to like churn it out, and then they find it. And then there's another actor where maybe like they kind of need a word of encouragement between takes, or like some sort of moment with you, with me as director, to kind of help them feel like they're moving along. So it's just everyone kind of has their own method, and then it's a process of discovery for me of how can I kind of like be a different director to each person, because each actor responds because they're a different person in a different way. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's good that you recognize that. You said that you were kind of living with this material for a long time. How much has it changed from, what we're seeing now on the screen to like your initial concept?
Yeah, fun. It's fun to look back. So I had the initial idea was actually, it's funny. I've been watching The After Party on Apple TV Plus. If anyone's seen it, it's super fun. It's with Sam Richardson. It's a Lord Miller comedy, and it's kind of similar to that, where it was initially a college reunion. And the person that a group of people had bullied in high school was like coming back to get them. That was like the initial conceit. And I just found that kind of, for what I was trying to do, wasn't really working. So it sort of morphed into, okay, they're not coming back to a reunion. They are in high school, and then the idea of like this kind of difficult clique where there's some weird dynamics, and our main character is trying to figure out social anxiety and issues with relationships, and then kind of having it be more present tense, where the call is coming from inside the house, right? Like someone's like actively pursuing them now, as opposed to kind of this retrospective. So it was interesting to kind of be like, okay, like I don't really want to do flashbacks. I don't really want to do like back when we were in high school, because I wanted this like more present tense thriller. And discovering that like that kind of moved the story to a different place. So yeah, that was kind of the initial shift. And then from there, once that was all figured out, it was just a process of writing and rewriting and honing the characters, and getting all of that sussed out. But it was
Sure, yeah.
interesting to kind of have that big shift and discovering what worked better.
Did you find when you were writing the initial version where it was multiple timelines or with flashbacks, however you would have figured it out, when you kind of peeled that off, like removed one layer, did it really like bust it wide open? Like it was so much easier to get it going?
Yeah, and I found that happened with a couple of my scripts where there's something, and it's just the process, right? Like you're kind of, it's like excavation, like you're those people in Jurassic Park at the beginning that are like trying to like find the actual skeleton in the ground. You're trying to find the actual shape, and you kind of maybe like digging in the wrong spot. You're like over here, and you're like, ah, it's like uh, that's not actually where it actually lives. Where you're gonna find the meat of the story. You kind of have to dig over here now. So yeah, I think it really kind of opened up, especially the thriller aspect of it being like much more present tense as opposed to like looking back and being this kind of more, it felt more like a drama, like, oh, remember in high school we were jerks. I kind of wanted to be like, no, like right now we're being jerks and this is what happens when you're a jerk.
Right. To kind of build on your metaphor, do you ever find that say you're digging in the wrong spot and people are, or maybe an inside voice is telling you that's the wrong spot and you're like, no, it has to be this spot. And then you realize like a month later, like, well, why? Why can't I go over there?
Yeah, that's like, I'm working on rewriting a new horror script right now, which is a ghost story and it deals with past trauma. And it definitely has been a situation where it's for me, it's like everything is connected. Like for this script, it's like something's a little weird over here. Okay, I'm adjusting it, and oh, that actually, it's like to take that metaphor ad nauseum. Like, oh, that's the spine. That's like means that it affects everything about the script. Like this one little issue is actually in relationship to a bunch of other things. So once you start making alterations over here and improving it, it does, have to affect the whole. So that's also a very interesting process where you're like, no, 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 like the rest of this is all good. It's just this one little spot that needs to get better. It's like actually it's all kind of this living organism that is going to change and shift as you make, you know, some sort of change in a pivotal area over here.
Right.
So
Like dropping a stone in the lake and you get the ripples
yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Not have the ripples.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. It's always interesting to me to hear a writer's process, like how you not just start, because it seems like the first draft is usually the easiest because it's just anything that comes in your head, put it down, and you're like, oh, my 90-minute movie has a 300-page script that's not going to work.
Yeah, the first draft I think I've learned to enjoy. I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I'm a bit of a type A personality. So I think at first it was like, why isn't this amazing right now?
Yeah.
So kind of learning, I only write, and I know not to be comparing myself, but Lawrence Kasdan, who is obviously one of the greatest living screenwriters, wrote Raiders, wrote, Empire Strikes Back, just like Body Heat, incredible guy. He and I learned that he was doing what I was doing, which is he only writes his first drafts by hand. And that's something I learned as well, where I'll just buy a notebook. And I learned that, like, and this is just for me, everyone has their own process. But when I was typing a first draft, I kept editing and re editing that first page, that second page. I was like, oh, this first page has to be perfect. Like that line of dialogue has to be like so good, and I wouldn't really get anywhere, and I would just sort of like rehone things without seeing the whole structure. So again, like another lousy metaphor, like I felt like I was like fastidiously painting one wall of a house, but like the rest of the house wasn't even built. Like
Right.
I, and like wow, this like paint looks great on this wall, but I don't have a house to live in. So what the hell do I know if that paint actually will look good? So I think buying that notebook and just grabbing a pen and just sort of writing it by hand for me really freed me to let it be messy and also just to like discover what the architecture could look like, without having to like feel the need to improve on little things yet because it's too early.
And you're talking full script, not just an outline.
Oh, full script, definitely. I outline pretty, I do note cards, I outline. I kind of reach a point of inflection, which I found where I'm just like, I can't think about it anymore. I need to just, it's kind of like, all right,
Yeah.
like I've done my homework, it's time to do the thing. And it's a kind of a gut feeling. And once I reach that inflection point, it's like, okay, time to get that notebook and let's just like spew it out and see what it is, see the lay of the land. And then, yeah, do the whole draft by hand. And it really has helped get that first like draft zero iteration out there.
I think that's a really cool process. It's really interesting. And I like that you're able to find that inflection point and dive into it, because the other alternative I imagine would just be for the next 2 years, you're moving note cards around on your desktop and you're not ever actually doing anything. And your friends are like, oh, yeah, you're writing a script. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Totally. I think it's an important thing. And I think like you can get too bogged down in the pre-writing process to the point where it can be like paralyzing. So I always try to listen to that moment where it's like, all right, like this is a structure. And then also every single time the story has shifted. Like just like what we were talking about with originally the initial idea was this college thing and discovering it once you leap in and go for it. Oh, it actually is becoming something else. So I try never, I do of course outline, but I try not to cling to it too tightly because in practice, when it goes on the page, it inevitably becomes something different than what you initially imagined. Whether that's different in a huge way, like what we were discussing, or different enough that you're like, oh, this character that I thought didn't really matter is actually really important, and I need way more of this. That can really, I think, happen pretty much every time to me, at least.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
That's really cool. Along with handwriting and kind of putting the computer aspect of it aside, do you also avoid the internet? Maybe put your phone away so there's no internet wormholes where you're like, oh, I wonder how that would look, and you research something insignificant for 45 minutes.
Oh, that's such a great question. That's so. I've definitely done that. Where I'm just like, wow, like I wonder what that speedboat does look like.
Yeah.
So random. Yeah, I definitely have a practice. I pretty much write every day, if unless I have something else going on. Like for Student Body, took a break to promote the film, but now I'm back at it. Now that the film's released. And I really take my phone. I mean, I have it with me now, but I put it in a drawer in the bedroom and I just have it far away and I'll check it like once while I'm doing lunch. But I don't even have it near me. And I, get rid of all windows online, like on my browsers that have like email or anything. So I just there's just no reason to even look at it. And I think, culturally we're kind of trained like you have to always check your notifications. And I just think it really harms the process of flow as a writer. So it's so great to just put the devices away and just put on my headphones and get into the zone and listen to the playlists I created for that script and dive in without feeling like I need to attend to other people or other things because I don't. They can, I'll email them back later today.
Yeah,
It'll be
they can wait a
fine.
couple hours.
Yeah,
Yeah, world's not ending.
exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. You have to remove the distractions, and also that you said you write every day. You have to stay in it, even if it's just a little bit. It's just I would find better for your mentality, and then you're not kicking the rust off every week when you're like, well, it's Sunday. I should probably write.
Yeah, completely. And I think it takes the pressure off of any individual day. So if you're writing, I do every work day. I'm not, writing 7 days a week. I'm not there yet. I don't anticipate it unless it's, a time related
Crunch
thing,
time. Yeah.
crunch time. But by working every work day, that means that on a given day, if things aren't quite copacetic and awesome, that's okay. I'll be back tomorrow. Whereas I feel like if you have more of a mentality of like, oh, I'll write when the mood strikes me or like when I feel the muse, I would just actually find that really stressful because if you're like, oh, if that comes down to 1 or 2 days a week or even once a week or a couple times a month, that means that that day has to be so good
Yeah.
because you haven't worked on it for 7 other days. And that is a lot of pressure emotionally. Because then if you're not hitting, if you're not like zooming out 15 pages and they're freaking amazing, then why did, all those other days, I think that would be really stressful. So I find if you having this kind of workaday attitude and kind of demystifying it, making it less of like, oh, I'm an artist and I must make art. It's like, no, like yesterday I wrote a couple pages and I think they work, but I could look at them today and they might not, and I'll just adjust them from there. It feels much more, um, I don't know, quotidian, kind of just normal. um, and that for me really helps take off that pressure of like, it has to be good. Yeah,
Right.
the end product you want to be good, but every day you don't have to be good. You just have to keep working at it.
Do you set yourself like I'm going to write 4 pages, I'm going to write 2,000 words, or you just kind of write as you write when you hit a block, maybe go for a walk, write a little bit more, go have lunch, whatever it is?
I think it's that Adam the ladder. I'd say like I don't for me when I'm not under a deadline, it doesn't help to be like I must have 4 pages. Because sometimes you reach a kind of squeaky spot like I have been lately, a squeaky spot where just one little scene might be related to a bunch of other things that you're trying to fix and it could be really tricky to get it right. So I feel like as long as I'm putting in, a couple of hours, that could vary. It could be 2 hours, it could be 4 or 5 hours, but as long as I'm putting in like a good chunk of my mental energy. And yeah, I do like to take breaks. I go on long walks. I find them really helpful. Um, I feel like I can hang my hat on that day. And then I'm not worried about like, oh, well, I didn't do 3 more pages. It's like, yeah, well, this scene took me 4 hours today to even figure out. And that's okay. And I feel
Yeah.
like, again, it's like whatever I feel like I would recommend. And again, everyone works differently. I'm not like, I'm correct and you're incorrect. It's just like whatever you can do, I feel, as a writer to alleviate the pressure to be awesome all the time, because that's going to cripple you, I think, emotionally. Then again, you can make that process much more chill and take it kind of day by day.
That's really strong advice. I like everything you said. I agree with everything you said. I could probably just go even deeper and keep talking writing strategy for like 5 hours, but we should probably dive a little deeper into student body. So I appreciate you going on that tangent with me.
Yeah.
So student body, how we did talk about your early concept being a little bit different, and you're traditionally on stage. What led you into horror?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I grew up basically obsessed with Hitchcock, and just really loved his films. And also, she's not horror, but I really read a lot of Agatha Christie. So I love this idea of like a group of people stuck in a space and like something scary has happened. For her, it's murder, but like something has happened and people have to kind of just deal with each other, and how that can be like a really intense experience as well. So I think those were very informative for me. And then growing up and finding movies like Alien and just kind of, and the Shining, like these kind of closed door claustrophobic situations where Jack Torrance and his family are stuck in this hotel and things get weirder and weirder, and like in Alien they're stuck on the Nostromo, and it starts out like kind of chill with this group of crew, but little by little like things get scarier and badder. And I just really liked this idea of like a closed door environment for these characters as kind of like a pressure cooker. So yeah, I'd say it was like not necessarily like I am going to make a horror movie, but just more of like these themes and this geography and this way of putting characters in a difficult environment was informed by all these films I watched growing up that I really loved. And I think like having this idea of an exterior force that's scary and putting pressure on them and killing some of them maybe, but also like letting the horror be what they do to each other as well. Like an Alien, you have, for those who have seen it, you have Ash, who's the I'm going to use the wrong term. I'm sure someone will be like, that's not what it is. The AI who, and you learn that the ship itself, like it's this whole really screwed up thing where it's like the crew is expendable and like we can use them and the real mission is to bring the xenomorph. Like there's a horrible thing that's happening between the characters. It's not just the alien and the xenomorph that's like scary and bad. And you see that in Aliens as well with the character of Burke. And also, I just think that that's so interesting. And so for Student Body, it's like, yes, you have, for those of you who have seen the trailer or seen the film, you have this mascot who's dressing up and is stalking them, but that's like this exterior externalization of pressures that they already have within themselves and within each other. That there's, already something really messed up about Jane and Merritt's relationship and Jane's relationship with Mr. Onspach, her math teacher, and there's some not great behaviors between the teens. And I just think that it was kind of taking these like great films that I had grown up with, and putting them in this context of something that I also loved, which is coming of age teen movies like Heather's, Clueless, all those films that I also loved and grew up with.
That's a really cool way to articulate it because by the time the horror starts, you really have a feel for who all of the people are. It's not just um I can't think of the word for it. You know, the jock and the cheerleader, the typical tropes in a movie, and then something horrible happens and you care because you're supposed to care. Like you know who the people are, then something horrible starts to happen.
Yeah, and I think that, as we're seeing with films like Parasite, and even also if you look back at classics like Psycho, the movie is really going down this very both films really going down this character driven path where you're getting to know Marion Crane, like you're getting to know the family in Parasite, and then there's kind of this mid film switch where those tensions and those anxieties become more genrefied and externalized. So for Psycho, Marion Crane is running away. She's making some not great choices. She's a very wonderfully interesting and intricate female character. And then she meets Norman Bates, and then things start to kind of take this other turn. And I think sometimes we forget that the shower scene in Psycho is midway through the film. It's at the exact midpoint. So that means that half of the film is about how Marion Crane got into the shower. And so for me, I like love that notion of really getting to know these imperfect people. And at first it's like, oh, that's easy. Like he's the artist, she's the jock, like he's the clown, she's the smart, like, and having those things seem really easy. But then as we get to know them, realizing that all of them are much more intricate than that, and also using these kind of, like I'm tough or like I'm cool and smart, they're kind of armor to hide their own vulnerabilities. So I love taking this notion of like taking our time with these relationships and with these characters, also having moments that show that something bad is going to happen, but then letting the second half of the film take us to a new phase where those anxieties and issues become externalized, much like in Psycho or in a film like Parasite.
Yeah, that's now that you mention it, because I never thought about it in such the timing of the terms, but you mentioned Psycho and you mentioned The Shining before and you mentioned Alien, and all of those movies, half the movie is not
Yep.
supernatural or horror in any way, then the other half it's all there,
Yep.
but you're so in on the characters, you're just along for the ride.
Yeah, it's a great example. I mean, you have the scene find the egg. Like, obviously, like I wanted to have moments in Student Body where we see shadows, we see like they're kind of moments where things seem a little, no, a couple shots I did to make a couple characters seem more ominous. You want to hint at what's to come. The opening credits hinting at what's to come. You don't want it to be like so jarring. But I think, Alien, a lot of that first half is just them trying to figure out how to get home. They woke up early and you're kind of this guy, these guys over here have problem with the engine and Dallas is trying to, manage the crew. It's, and Ellen Ripley is kind of like on the sideline. She's not really who you think the lead is going to be. So that very much felt like an inspiration and not so much a template, but just proof, I would say, that what I was doing has precedent for being very effective, and for me, making sure that my audience felt really connected to these teens, and when things started happening to them, it really actually mattered, and it wasn't just like, oh cool, like what's the wow, she got her arm ripped off or whatever. Like it wasn't about like touring them, it was about like these teens are dying in this school, and unfortunately that's a real thing. So I wanted to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, that's it all makes so much sense and really like shines not a new light, but a deeper light on your movie. Like everything you're saying, I know, but I'm only knowing it thinking back now that you're saying it, if that makes sense.
No, I'm excited that it added a new dimension to the
Yeah,
experience.
for sure, that's awesome. Speaking of the look of it, it looked, like the way it was shot, the framing, the quality of it, like, it's all super top notch. Um, I'm trying to I don't want it to sound insulting at all because I definitely mean it as a compliment, but sometimes, you know, you see lower budget movies and you understand like, "Oh, well, it looks like this because it's a lower budget movie." It's
Of course.
whatever, you move on. But it was really it looked phenomenal, and
Thank you.
I don't know if you had a lot of say in what camera and that kind of stuff, or if could you talk about that process?
Yeah, thank you so much. you definitely have limitations when you're working at this budget level, and we also had 18 days to shoot,
Oh
which
wow.
anyone who has worked on a film knows. I mean, I've heard of films that have done less, but I can't imagine doing less. So it was, a very rapid environment. And we didn't, we also were very careful to not go over 12 hours. I think we had like one day where Grip and Electric wrapped a little bit later. We paid them overtime, of course, but I really also feel that it's important, especially in light of what's happened recently with the Rust shooting and things that have happened with, IATSE. I just think that it's so important to take care of our crew and to make sure, we didn't have a ton of money, but sticking to that 12-hour window was just really important to me for everyone to be healthy and safe. But anyway, that little sidebar aside, yeah, I worked really closely with my cinematographer, Luca Bazzelli, who is a wonderful person and a wonderful artist. And also, fun fact, his dad actually shot The Ring. He works with Gore Verbinski a lot, Boyan Bazzelli. So anyway, little fun fact about that. But that's
Yeah,
not
that's
why I
cool.
hired him. Luca is an incredibly talented person, and he and I really spent a ton of time going over what that shot list looks like for each scene, going over the visual design. A couple scenes I had pretty much already storyboarded, and was like, nope, like there's a one of the I don't want to give anything away. The first murder kill scene that occurs, um, I had pretty much shot for shot been like, this is exactly what I want to happen. And then I also, hopefully viewers or second time viewers might see this on a more subconscious level. I also wanted the colors that we used in the school in the second half to reflect the characters. So when a character dies, after their death, we see their kind of color used in the school. And so that was very deliberate as well. And then he kind of just took those initial things that I had about the design of the film. I also love working with visual art in terms of that being an inspiration point. So there's a painter that had these paintings and a body of work that I felt reflected the vibe that I wanted for the whole film. Because thinking about like the visual design of the film, so I basically like bought this book and like sat down with these prints of this painter's work and was like, here's how I want the film to feel. And so Luca took that and took those kind of scenes that I'd already kind of established as like these are kind of the tent poles of the design and how I want things to work, and just ran with it from there. So I would say it was a very close relationship, but also, because I had laid out what I wanted the film to look like, he had a basis and a bedrock to work off of so that we were speaking the same language and making the same film at all times.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's cool how clear your vision was from the start. Like, I
Thank
mean,
you.
like literal vision. Obviously, you would have your script solid, but the literal look of it, how crystal clear it was for you. And
Yeah.
how about the location?
Yeah, so I love every aspect of movie making. I also just love finding the locations. So we shot in three different schools. Our first leg of production was in Atlanta. So we shot the whole film in Georgia. And we had two schools that we were there. We had a school with the pool, so the pool scene, and then we had a charter school that we did for some of the hallways and classrooms. And then for the second leg of production, we moved up to Raven Gap, which is right on the border of Georgia and North Carolina. It's like barely in Georgia. It's up in the mountains. It's really gorgeous and it's a wonderful boarding school where we were able to get a ton of stuff, basically everything else, all the interiors, most of the interiors. The soccer scene was all there, and you have the view of the mountains. So just basically making sure that it all felt like one school and that it all felt very remote so that when, you know, no one can hear you scream. You didn't want to be like,
Right.
oh, this school's in the middle of a neighborhood. Like, I feel like someone heard. So yeah, and then Oglethorpe University in Atlanta was kind of that main facade of the school. And we were just so excited to use that and a couple of key places in there. So yeah, it was a really fun process of like making sure it all made sense and all felt like one place, but using the best out of various locations to get what we needed out of certain spaces.
That's awesome. I would have guessed that you found a school that was on break or something, and just because it did stitch together seamlessly, and the outside of the building you used was so impressive. It's like, well, of course that would have everything you would need.
Yeah, no, it worked out really well. I think my initial idea was like one school and we'll just like live there and like shoot there, but we had to piece it out a little bit more to get everything we needed.
Yeah.
But I'm glad it looked like it all was one. That was
Oh,
the intent.
definitely. Yeah. Especially because you go inside and outside a lot. It's not like, oh, they're in a hallway. Oh, and they changed the posters in the same hallway, and then they turned and they're in a hall. Like you were all over the
Yeah.
place. So
It's true. I was working with my line producer, Buzz Wallach, who is a totally wonderful line producer. And I remember it was pre production, and he was like, Leanne, you have so many locations in the script. And I was like, what are you talking about? It takes place in one school. Like, there's no way. And it's like, oh, like hallway one, hallway two, like this classroom, this. And it's like, oh, actually, it's a ton of places that we had to find. So it was quite an adventure.
yeah, that's awesome. I know I kept you a little long, but want to tell everybody where they can find Student Body and anything else you want to plug, maybe your socials or anything else you're working on.
Yeah, sure. So Student Body is available for rent or purchase on on-demand platforms like Google Play, iTunes, Apple TV, Amazon. So would love for people to check it out. And I think, hopefully we'll end up on one of those streamers, but for right now, we're going to be available for rent or purchase on those platforms. And yes, I'm on Instagram. My handle is at Lanwho, LAANWHO. And I have a website, leannekurr.com. So yeah, I just really hope that people go and check out the film. I think it's both like, taking from classic films, but then also meant for like a Gen Z 2022 audience. So I'm excited for people to check it out.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations on the movie. Best of luck with the release, and thank you so much for coming on and doing the deep dive with me. That was awesome.
Thanks, Adam. Really appreciated it.
I'd like to thank Lee Ann one more time for coming on the show to talk to me about her latest movie, Student Body. As I said, available now. Make sure you check out Lee Ann's works, check out Student Body, follow her on social media. Either way to see a lot of cool stuff coming from her in the future. Make sure you like and subscribe. We have a lot more interviews, a lot more new movie coverage. We got a lot more Amazon Prime screeners coming out. You're not going to want to miss out. A lot of cool stuff coming your way. Also, make sure you listen to So Wizard Podcast every single week, wherever you get your podcasts. So Wizard Podcast can also be found on Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you get multiple monthly bonus shows. SoWizardPodcast.com is your resource for reviews, recommendations, videos, merchandise, and more. We love hearing feedback, so drop us a note in the comments. Leave us something on social media. All the accounts can be found after the show and in the show notes. And on a more personal note, a good friend and I have an ongoing comedy comic series out. It's called Social Studies. It's a slice of life comedy comic, all about the high school experience. We write it like a sitcom. We keep it light and fun, and we jam it all through the prism of the 90s cartoons that we grew up on and love. You can find all of that at socialstudiescomic.com or on Comixology. Thanks.